Yeah, and I do think this comes back to like my mantra is that it is very clear to me, though I'm like a private sector business owner, that the biggest distinction between somebody like me and corporations is that corporations benefit from dividing and isolating people. That the further someone is driven into isolation, the less power they have, and the less power they have, that means they are more exploitable for profit. Versus a business owner, an independent business owner, a small business owner that, though they sell goods, like I sell you a coffee, you paid me and I get a profit, I benefit from looking you in the eyes when I sell you. I ask you your name when I cash you out. We have a conversation about it. I get to know you as a person, and when you come back, I remember your order, I remember your name, I remember your dog. Those relationships are what keep people coming back into my space. And in a lot of other small businesses, it's that human interaction, that personal interaction that I have access to. You don't have access to anyone at Google. You don't have access to Jeff Bezos. You don't have access to Mark Zuckerberg. And yet you are completely, largely in your economic productive life, defined by the tools that they set. And you did not get to write any of the rules of the game. You just had to opt in because, like most of us,
if you don't, out of fear. If you don't, you will be.
Well, you run out of money. You know, you can't pay your bills.
Evolve or die.
Yeah. And so I think by being divided in that way and isolated, we lose our power, and we feel completely at the whim of these companies and the direction they'll take to dictate how we then get to live our lives.
This episode made possible by Restaurant Systems Pro. With excitement, allow me to introduce to you today's guest, owner of Teatotaller, Emmett Soldati. My man, Emmett, are you feeling unstoppable today?
Today, surprisingly, yeah.
Dude, psyched to have you here. So I literally, you were on my radar. I actually think I've seen video of you recently online. Were you on some recent podcasts? Seacoast Online or Granite State or something like that?
Yeah, I've been in a fair amount of media
recently.
Why is
that?
I was running for office.
So like you feel like strangely familiar, because I feel like I've just seen you like subconsciously, like I feel like you feel familiar, but you were specifically called out to me yesterday when I was talking to the folks over at Folded, the 501c3.
Oh, rad.
The work they're doing over there. Mark Siegel was like, you gotta talk to Emmett. He's doing amazing work. They spoke of how you helped them get started, and they said you gotta talk to him, and they immediately reached out. We're here today. We're making it happen. Less than 24 hours, kind of like probably like 18 hours from like
podcast magic.
Yeah, man, making it work. The power of being in person and traveling and just making shit happen. So I can't wait to talk about like who you are. But first, actually, paint the big picture. Like, what is your business today? Like, what does it consist of?
Yeah, so I have Teatotaller Cafe and started 14 years ago. We do tea, coffee, espresso, boba. We're a bakery. So pastries and some light food. And I have 2 locations. Awesome. One is in Concord and one is in Dover, which is where we're sitting now.
Love it. What is your gross revenue combined?
So this is new because we just opened this location. We will probably hit $700K combined gross revenue.
And do you know your prime?
I don't even know what that
prime
word
costs.
Means. Oh.
Like, what's the balance?
I would love to... I'm going to put it the other way. I hope we hit 15%.
Okay. In profit?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Cool. Thank you. This is a new question I want to start asking all my guests, and I feel like I give them a warning before. I'm like, this is coming.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have to answer it.
I mean, if you had asked me like 5 years ago, I'd been like -10.
Well, I can't wait to talk about how you got into the positive by 15%. That's better than most. I can't wait to get into it. Before we dive into who you are and how you got to where you are today, let's get that motivational, inspirational, ball rolling with a success quote or mantra. What do you got for us?
You know, I think my mantra is, as a business owner, you know, because a lot of folks, they do things that have dividends that are paid out to the community, not just your bottom line. They want to like serve and get involved, but like you need to have in the private sector a business that is sustainable. And so I sort of think about Teatotaller, or maybe any for-profit activity I undertake, is at the end of the day, no matter what, it has to connect people and not isolate people. That I don't want to be part of a business or an operation that divides people or makes people less connected with their neighbors, their community, and so forth. And so everything I do, even though there's a very real product I'm selling, has to bring people together, and that has been a huge mission of Teetotaler at its core.
I think that's what the mission of the hospitality industry has always been, and I think we've gotten away from that. And I think we have to reconnect with what hospitality is, like the public house. You know what I'm saying? The restaurant. Like,
yeah, it's the third space.
It's about coming together,
Yep.
and it has gotten away from that over the recent years. So I love hearing you say that that's what you're trying to do here. Awesome stuff. Any thoughts before we dive back to where it makes sense to start sharing your story?
I have so many thoughts, but let's
I'm
just
sure
go.
they'll come out. They will come out. So when did you know? Like, take me back to, like, I am going to open my own restaurant.
Well, my friends make fun of me because I'm always usually open. Anytime I talk in public, I'm like, well, I had a lemonade stand and when I was 7 years old, which I did. That's true. But I don't actually think that is when I got that sort of entrepreneurial bent. I went to film school.
Okay.
And then I got a master's degree in anthropology. So I very much kind of thought maybe my life was going to be very different. I wasn't thinking like I want to either A, open a business, or B, open a restaurant. My grandfather was a caterer and a restaurateur, but I never met him. So there was a little bit of like lore in our family, especially the men. Like my dad was like the main cook for our family. And so I think maybe that rubbed off on me, but I didn't have any specific aspirations until 14 years ago. I was living in London and I moved back to my hometown of Somersworth, which is very small. And I love Somersworth and have always loved Somersworth for a lot of reasons, but it's also struggled economically and socially. And I thought, Somersworth needs more spaces, to gather, to commune, etc. And I just left this big city thinking like, wow, you have everything at your fingertips. Can't we have something nice? And so it was then I thought, I want to do something to bring the community together. And I just like sort of threw a bunch of stuff against the wall and saw what stuck. And at the time, I'd been living in the UK, so I was like very into drinking tea. I had just stopped drinking alcohol, so I was a teetotaler. I was sober. And so all of these ideas came together. I had a passion for baking, and it just sort of came up, like I just literally the summer as I was moving home.
Can we timestamp this? When was this?
This was 2011.
2011.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I just like thought of the name teetotaler, which is a pun. It's a very sort of strange, hard to pronounce pun. And it just sort of stuck. And I was like, I'm going to do this. And I think even though I was not previously like aspirational in terms of opening a restaurant, I have always been someone, and this is a curse as much as it is a blessing, that the moment I think of an idea, I cannot shake it until I commit to it. So it wasn't so much I've been dreaming about my perfect cafe or perfect restaurant. It was, I got this idea, I need to do it in Somersworth, let's make it happen. And that's what happened.
Dive more into what a teetotaler is. I think you mentioned, is it somebody who gives up alcohol? Is that like
yeah, it's like
British
it's an old British term from like the temperance movement in the 20s, spelled differently, that just refers to someone that doesn't drink. Obviously putting TEA makes it about tea and a cafe style name. So that's where that came from.
So is it like totally tea and only tea? Not alcohol? Totaler?
Well, there's actually disputed origins of the word teetotaler.
Here comes the anthropology.
Yeah, one I think was that there was like a leader of the temperance movement allegedly had a stutter and was trying to say the word total, and it just sort of came out as teetotal, and that stuck in the movement. So it's sort of a very unique and specific term. Obviously, for a lot of people that are sober will have heard of it because it just sort of comes up. Most people don't know how to say it or pronounce it.
Was I saying it right?
Yeah, teetotaler.
Sick.
Yeah,
Nice.
You got it.
Awesome. So I usually destroy names of things, I'm not going to lie. So, okay, so you're basically just feeling like at this time in your life, you're coming back, you're feeling like something's missing in Somersworth. You want to bring people together, you want to connect, get people, over what? Was there like, connect over what? Like what was like the just general connection, or was there something missing that you wanted to bring awareness to?
When I grew up, we never locked our doors, like deliberately. My parents were very much, I had 3 siblings, and my parents wanted to make sure that our home was really welcome and open to the neighborhood, to our friends, whether they had an unstable situation or, we wanted to always make sure that our doors were open. And that ethos definitely has sort of carried along with me and my siblings around always making sure people feel welcome, feel included. And obviously there's like a hospitality aspect to that. And so when I moved home, there were so many things that growing up I had seen that were special in my community of like, at the end of the day, even if we don't hang out regularly, we don't consider each other friends, like we show up for each other and we're there to support each other in our times of need and so forth. And that, on a very small scale for me, has sort of transformed my life and my heart and my soul. And I recognize, even living in London and other big cities, that that is something a lot of people take for granted. And it is not a guarantee where you live. You might live in a neighborhood, but it is not a bunch of neighbors that come together per se. And I realized it was a deliberate act of my parents, whether it's keeping the doors unlocked or having certain events or parties that activate those connections. And without that deliberate gesture, those deliberate spaces, it's not inevitable. Like, people might just continue to isolate and be alone and have, their screens to keep them company. You need to actively move against that force to bring people in person together, to look in each other's eyes, to talk to each other, to meet each other, and understand that they have sort of mutual values and mutual needs.
Why does it have to be physically in the same space?
Well, I just feel like if it's not that you're not actually like activating that, like, I don't know, that dopamine center where you're feeling seen and you feel like you belong. I think there is something very important about knowing someone is there physically, because it also means that, again, like if something happens, like if you're in trouble or if you're have a flat tire or something, that there's someone you can call, that there's someone nearby that can literally do something about it. Just having relationships that are mediated digitally or telephonically, it doesn't kind of totally fulfill all of your needs as a social person.
Yeah, as a social creature. And also, I think you can't hide behind anonymity.
Yeah. It's like much more, it's like, I mean, this is like a buzzword, but it's a much more authentic, just in the sense of if you are present with someone. Yeah. There's less you can hide just in terms of the way you interact. And
it forces you to be respectful and decent. And I think so. I'm loving a lot of what you're sharing with me, and I think you said like we have to be deliberate and intentional about creating space to come together. And I echo this all the time. I think it's really important that we do. The word public house, which derives from British culture. I'm pretty sure when we were establishing America, if you wanted to establish a town, the first thing that was like number one, create a public house. Yeah, and it was before a post office, before a church, before a town office. It was a public house. That was literally the place, the town center. You needed that. It was a prerequisite.
You have to gather.
You have to have space to gather, come together, and communicate. And we lost that somehow. Yeah. And I think people argue sometimes. They're like, oh, we have the internet and we're more connected than ever. I'm like, are we? Like, there are beautiful things about the internet. I think it has fragmented our channels of communication, which has given power to a lot of people, and it has decentralized and taken power away from a lot of people. But at the same time, there's something that we need to come together in person, and it's not a substitute to that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, man. So I am a little more, I want to dive, before we kind of start talking about your progress, your steps towards getting the Teatotaller open, anthropology. I love this subject, and I'm curious to go deeper here to see if I can't connect dots. I think it's fascinating. Why what for you? What is fascinating about anthropology?
Well, I went to school for film production initially, and I wanted to be a director, etc. And I just, as I was 18, 19 years old, I sort of realized I had sort of this nagging sense in me that, like, okay, I can become as proficient as I want in the sort of the production side, the tools, the gadgets, the software, etc.
I thought when I bought these cameras, the job was over. I didn't realize I was just creating more jobs. It just keeps going, dude.
But then I sort of realized, like, well, what does all the gear matter if I don't have something to say? And along that time, I was just like taking other courses in college and realizing, like, being from from Somersworth, from a small town in a small state that is very homogenous. We're one of the whitest states. We're, sort of culturally there's not a lot of a mix.
Right.
And so suddenly through school and traveling, like being exposed to other cultures and other ideas, just like piqued a part of, my interest and passion. And so I left film just feeling like I hadn't filled out enough of the sort of
perspective.
My understanding of the world.
Yeah.
I moved to London for grad school, and it was like, oh wait, you're telling me that the United States is not the center of the universe, and like,
Right.
and that New York City is not the center of the universe. Like, there's just so much of more of a world out there that
Right.
they don't care at all. I thought was super important, and so I think anthropology. It was actually sort of a visual anthropology program, so it was like still connected to film and media making, but it just sort of like was an academic way of expressing my interest in people
and learning more about like understanding different types of people from different places.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
after studying, how long? I mean, what year did you start focusing on anthropology?
Senior year of college.
How old were you
Like
then?
21.
When did you graduate?
College 22, and then I had a 1-year master's.
Okay,
after
so like
that.
2024-ish is when like you started, or 2023.
The age, yes, yeah.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out like how much time elapsed from this focus on anthropology to 2011. Was it about 8 years?
2 years.
2 years? Okay. So
Like 2009.
I'm just kind of curious, like, how has this focus on human evolution over time, human people, like the understanding of how people function and how we got to where we are, like, how has that influenced who you are today?
It's so funny you ask me that, because people always, so I went to a school called the London School of Economics, and so people are like, oh, he's a business owner, he studied economics, and I'm like, actually, I didn't. And having an anthropology, sociology type program, obviously it's not a professional degree. I'm not like learning how to like do customer service. I'm learning about different cultures, but I think in many ways it has made me really adept at knowing that I would then go on to open a business that served the community and wanted to be open to the community. I think it changed the way I would approach that. I think someone else without that perspective might treat certain things as liabilities. Like if there's issues around substance use, if there's issues around homelessness, if there's issues around sort of different cultural attitudes on certain things, they might be like, this is affecting my bottom line. I need to sort of like focus on the product and selling. Whereas for me, I'm like, oh, it may not be changing how much money I make, but I actually do want to work with the recovery organizations around and bring them into my space. Or I do want to have a very deliberate social values around supporting the queer community. And I think part of that, I mean, I might have already been that way, but I think part of it was having a little bit more of a sophisticated approach to understanding how people think about culture and talk about culture and think about change and how our cultures change.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I just, for one, am super fascinated about anthropology. And for some reason, like when I started diving into, just curious about how did we get here? What the fuck are we? And how did we get here? And you start diving down that rabbit hole of just evolution and how we, over the past 2 million years, have just like, I'm sure you probably read Sapiens
I have read Sapiens.
Yeah. Like,
I've almost never read a book when someone says, have you read a book? But I have read that book.
Just seeing like how we got here and how, and I think really the answers to our future are in studying our past and really cracking the code of like, what was the majority of our existence like as hunter-gatherers, and how do we kind of, because you think about where we are today in the past 10,000 years, it's really a snapshot of like our existence, and we've evolved as tight-knit social groups, and we live in these cities today. And part of the reasons why we abuse substance so much is because of our inability to deal with that many relationships. They think we started using alcohol as a way to cope with our anxieties around being around so many different people, you know. It's just all fascinating how it's all connected. And we live in a world today, you were talking about just substance abuse and all this stuff, where we were never meant to have so much access to such strong alcohol. Like we never evolved to be able to handle this temptation that's at our fingertips. But if you're alive today, it's all you know. You know, and it's like literally all you know. So like, of course, like we're going to have an issue with it. And understanding where we came from and how we're meant to be and how we live today and how that's so not congruent with how we exist, like how we evolved to be. I just think it's fascinating. So I had to dive into that subject because when I heard that, my ears popped up.
Yeah, it definitely has given me a way of thinking about what I think some people don't think about culture in the sense of like, you have a restaurant or a space and you're dealing with the public and you're like, that's the general public, whatever. And it definitely gives me a lens to think about like, I've been in different communities. I've had a cafe in Somersworth and a cafe in Concord, and socioeconomically they're very different. And so then you see different types of people in some ways. And so having a way of understanding what is causing changes and changes from one neighborhood to the next or community to the next or city to the next, it gives me a critical lens. I don't know if I do a lot with that, but it definitely has served me in this shop.
Got it. So so when you were starting Teetotaller, did you have an issue with substance abuse?
No.
You
did I?
Did you just choose to give up alcohol?
Well, I got sober a year before I opened Teetotaller. Okay. And I mean, I guess I had an issue with substance use. I think for the longest time, and this relates to a conversation you might have had with John Burns, who's a good friend of mine. I stopped drinking for a range of reasons, and it never felt like something that met the threshold of sobriety and never met the threshold of recovery. Yes, I am sober. Yes, I don't I have sort of zero alcohol consumption. And through conversations with John, who runs SOS Recovery, and other people in recovery over several years, they would always ask me these questions of like, Emmett, why don't you consider yourself in recovery? And I'm like, I sort of had that idea in my head of like, well, there's a litmus test. Like you have to go so low, or you have to hit a certain point for it to quote unquote qualify as recovery or qualify as substance abuse or qualify as et cetera. And as John and others would sort of probe further and be like, well, you did drink, you consumed alcohol for certain reasons and then you didn't, what was it you're trying to recover? At the heart of recovery is like you're trying to get something back. You're trying to recover something or recover to a state. And for me, and through that investigation, I, certainly I started drinking at a very young age. And
how young were you?
Probably like... I don't know how old I was in like 8th or 9th grade, okay. But like in high school was drinking. And obviously like any young person like doesn't really have a full sort of awareness of what they're being exposed to with these substances and so forth. But it was very clear to me upon reflection that those substances brought me access to a level of confidence, not only socially, but a level of confidence in myself as someone who was becoming to understand myself as queer, that I otherwise in a lucid, sober state did not either feel comfortable with or did not understand. And I aspired to be a certain type of person that I thought was only able to be mediated with alcohol, whether it's like I want to be the first person on the dance floor, I want to be the most popular, gregarious person, I want to have like all these friends and so forth. And as I began to like recognize that and then slowly, wean myself off and begin stop drinking, I then had to confront this idea of, well, if I still want to be that person that's first on the dance floor, I got to step out completely sober and lucid, as uncomfortable, as awkward as it might be. And so those experiences of being in uncomfortable situations, which I mean shouldn't be uncomfortable, but today in our society are uncomfortable without alcohol, I began to have these experiences that I was trying to recover something deeper in me. And so through that process, I've really appreciated that we are all in recovery. Mm-hmm. Because if all of us who are modifying our relationship with substance use don't consider ourselves in recovery, then what that means is that the people that we consider in recovery are only the sort of most extreme examples. And the last thing those people need is to feel like they don't have any relation or connection to the rest of their community and that they're somehow marked as different. And so I think recovery is a spectrum. And so for me, I do identify as being in recovery, and it's a process, and that process looks different for some other people, maybe many other people. that go through AA or other programs, but I don't think it's valuable to sort of draw a line in the sand of this qualifies or that doesn't. I currently today do not drink, and I have had a lot of experiences in my life that are different from a lot of people that do drink because I have pursued them in a lucid state.
Got you. Thank you for getting into that. So
what up, Unstoppable restaurant owners and operators? We have to interrupt today's video to let you know that Restaurant Unstoppable and Restaurant Systems Pro, we're taking our relationship to the next level. Beginning in July of 2024, Fred Langley, CEO of Restaurant Systems Pro, is making himself available once a week in Restaurant Unstoppable Network to answer all of your restaurant systems questions, whether it's be profit margins. He will look at your P&L. Bring your P&L. He will take a look at that. He will dissect it. He will help you find your profit, whether that be through budgeting, inventory management, costing and recipe cards, labor, checklists, you name it. He is a master of restaurant systems, and he's making himself available to you. Fred Langley and Restaurant Systems Pro started as a consulting firm, and for over 16 years, they've been helping their clients increase their profit by 10% or more. What are you waiting for? Click the link below to join our Facebook group, Restaurant Unstoppable Network.
when you were starting Teatotaller in 2011, you wanted to build it around this idea of, sobriety, of inclusiveness, of bringing people together. At this point, were you also thinking about the issues with substance abuse? You recognize your sobriety. How was the restaurant going to be making an impact in the city of Somersworth? Actually, get into this. You mentioned Somersworth was kind of hurting too. So can you paint a picture of where Somersworth was in 2011?
Yeah. So Somersworth is a mill town, a former mill town. So we had our heyday, a century ago, like many communities in New England, and it had seen a couple declines. Like one decline was when the mills started, like textile mills started closing. We're talking like 1910, 1920. Then we sort of saw, like many other communities in the state, urban renewal, which was a period in the 1950s and 60s where, in part inspired by federal programs and positions and also locally, there was this idea of like, let's build completely new cities. And what it meant is they tore down all of the historic buildings, or many, it's different in different communities, but they tore down many historic buildings. And in Somersworth, for those that have grown up there in the last 30 years, you'll know that like the center of our town is a parking lot. And that actually used to be full of built embodied carbon. There were mill buildings and brick houses and so forth that were very dense, that created so much more density and vibrancy in terms of there were opera houses and bowling alleys and restaurants and bars.
Oh, man, it's so sad to know that was, I never knew that.
And now it's a parking lot. And many communities in New Hampshire and New England have gone through the same fate of urban renewal. Somersworth saw a little bit of a revival because GE opened a factory right downtown, and that brought, I think at the heyday, 2,000 jobs, 3,000, jobs in the thousands. And so that then sort of renewed a little bit of economic energy and activity locally, and then the sort of factory and macroeconomic conditions changed, and the factory went from like 2,000 employees to 200 employees. And Somersworth then suffered another sort of local economic crisis, and all of these things I'm saying have very similar analogies in a lot of former mill towns. Somersworth then went through its sort of final transition in the 90s, which again a lot of other communities did, is especially here in New Hampshire, because all of our revenue is derived from properties. We recognize that the farm, largely agricultural areas that were sort of the outskirts were not productive to our tax base. And so they went to the nearest bidder, which was Walmart. And we then saw the sort of big boxification of previously agricultural land, which at first, for an unwitting city council and city manager might have felt like, oh, we got like such a boon, like there's going to be more revenue coming in. We know now that many of these big box stores harmed the actual communities locally by pulling business out of the local hardware stores.
How could we have not seen that coming?
Well, I will say some communities did. There were petitions back in, 2000 to, the late 90s, early 2000s is when the sort of Walmart expansion was happening. Some communities petitioned it, and they said no. Somersworth, again, we just were not in an economic position, I think, to say no. There was sort of no alternative, and we didn't know what the beast was, because it was so new. We thought it felt like development. Just like, I think there were a lot of very well-intentioned and smart people during urban renewal that really believed we were going to build the city of our dreams with tramways and, canals and new modern buildings. And it's just, no, they're all parking lots. And so we're sort of in this new phase or stage in Somersworth, which again, a lot of communities are former mill towns, where we've sort of, the wool has been pulled past. We've lifted the veil of what Walmart and Target and Home Depot, et cetera, have done. And we've reinvested into our downtown, which are independently owned shops. And there's more of a diversification. So rather than one textile mill, there's a mill building with 30 businesses in it or 10 businesses in it. And so it's smaller, which means it's a little bit more fragile in some ways. But there's a diversification. And that brings sort of renewed interest and more property tax revenue and more residents and more density. So that's like the trajectory.
Help me understand this last step from Walmart to going into these abandoned mill buildings to kind of like I'm thinking of the tannery in Salisbury, where it's like a big building that was vacant and now you're like stages like One Washington Street in Dover.
Exactly.
So like you have these vacant facilities. Let's put local commerce, bring it together, make it convenient, one spot.
Yeah, I think historic preservation and reuse has had a growing hold in the last 20 years. It's taken us a long time to recognize that and value that. So I think a lot of people, and that's been a very locally driven effort in a lot of places and built on success stories of other communities of our mill buildings and what is left that wasn't destroyed in urban renewal is sort of the first step. Because with Somersworth, after we have this basically torn down center where it's just a parking lot, it's so hard to convince a developer to be like, you should come in and build, a 4-story building, first floor retail, market rate housing. They're like, this won't play. No one's going to move here. No one's going to open shops here, et cetera. And reusing existing structures was kind of the first step on that journey of getting development.
Right. So you in sharing that evolution of commerce since the early 20th century, you brought up a lot of things that I've noticed in the trends, and I think these cities like Manchester, Somersworth, Rochester, in Maine, like Lewiston,
exactly,
they were booming towns at one point. The industrial age came to an end, and everybody went to the Portlands, the Bostons, the New Yorks, the Miamis, the Chicagos of the world for the corporate America, the corporate jobs. But the cool thing is the pendulum is starting to swing because we're getting to the point where we don't need to be physically in a giant city for opportunity because of, again, one of the benefits of the internet is that we can now spread out and work remotely. And there's this movement of people going back to those middle tier level smaller cities. And I think there's so much potential, but I think we have to do it with consciousness and awareness of what do we want? How can we use the internet to fragment the channels of communication to give people better options and not let the corporate America come in and be like, no, we need more box stores. I
think Somersworth is just sort of a good example where we have been burned so many times that even, we have many elected officials who have been around for a very long time and have seen it. And even if they aren't the sort of most progressive, forward-thinking, future-looking people, they remember urban renewal. And they remember how vibrant we used to be, which, for someone that grew up in the 90s in Somersworth, when you look at photos of the streets flooded with people in Somersworth, I'm like, this can't be real. This cannot be Somersworth. And I think many communities are realizing okay, fool me once, shame on you, fool me 8 times, shame on me, we're not going to make the same mistake again. And so there's even the sort of more conservative old guard, legacy leaders of some of these communities know that we don't win by continuing to sell out to corporations, by tearing down historic buildings, and that sort of that diversity of commerce is our strength for the long haul.
So you shared this evolution of economics since the early 20th century, and now here we are in the 21st century, and I feel like at the turn of the century, we went from big corporate box stores to a different, more evolved version of corporate America, which is like the digital presence of so there's still that hurdle that we have to overcome. People might not be going to the Walmarts as frequently as they once were, but there's this other even bigger threat of like the Amazon,
Yeah.
So how do we deal with that? Or like the Whole Foods, like how do we compete with that? And on a local level, man,
we sue them.
No,
I just sort of feel like, I mean, what you're getting at is something I feel. Obviously, I've run for office. So I sort of have like political positions on this, but I feel like our biggest challenge is that in many ways, small communities can be blindsided and are sitting ducks for exploitation. And that cuts across like our access to healthcare, our commerce, our businesses, and so forth. But that if we aren't aware of how these other entities work and what they have to gain from our clicks and our eyeballs and our dollars,
yes,
then we aren't going to be winners in the end.
You said, I can't remember the words you used, but like that these entities have alienated or threatened the community, but I think it cuts even deeper to that, where it's going down to the individual.
Mm-hmm.
It's like these. You also mentioned that these big corporations are exploiting. I can't remember exactly what you're saying, but I think it's really important that it's happening from the largest point, like to the Googles, the Metas of the world, and the Microsofts, down to the individual level. And if we're going to change things, I don't think it has to come from educating the individual about like how their data, like what was the word you used is bothering me. I'm getting really worked up right now. Can you tell? Because I'm really loving the conversation. But I think when it comes to social media and Meta, Google, there's this thought being projected by these corporations that they're serving us, and they're giving so much free things to us, but is it really free? And are the benefits of the things that I'm using right now, Gmail, Google search, Instagram, to promote myself, where I'm literally in this ecosystem where I have no fucking choice but to use these tools to exist. And I don't know, how do I promote myself? How do I get myself out there into the world if I can't use these tools? But at the same time, like, what are these tools doing to influence and to manipulate me at a way where I'm being like I am forced to use these tools that literally just control me, and I'm not even conscious of it happening to me.
Well, and then they're going to be like, all right, well, now we changed our policy and you have to pay us $10.99 a month to even use these tools. That you have no power in the future to even dictate the terms. Like, you are completely at the behest of these corporations to decide, not because you can't choose to say, I don't click and accept the terms of service. It's because they have become hegemonic. They have become the normative tools we have to use just to operate today.
It's omnipresent. Like,
totally.
It's like we don't even know air exists and we need it to survive.
Yeah, and I do think this comes back to like my mantra is that it is very clear to me, though I'm like a private sector business owner, that the biggest distinction between somebody like me and corporations is that corporations benefit from dividing and isolating people. That the further someone is driven into isolation, the less power they have, and the less power they have, that means they are more exploitable for profit. Versus a business owner, an independent business owner, a small business owner, that though they sell goods, like I sell you a coffee, you paid me and I get a profit, I benefit from looking you in the eyes when I sell you. I ask you your name when I cash you out. We have a conversation about it. I get to know you as a person, and when you come back, I remember your order, I remember your name, I remember your dog. Those relationships are what keep people coming back into my space. And in a lot of other small businesses, it's that human interaction, that personal interaction that I have access to. You don't have access to anyone at Google. You don't have access to Jeff Bezos. You don't have access to Mark Zuckerberg. And yet you are completely, largely in your economic productive life, defined by the tools that they set. And you did not get to write any of the rules of the game. You just had to opt in because, like most of us,
if you don't, out of fear. If you don't, you will be.
Well, you run out of money. You know, you can't pay your bills.
Evolve or die.
Yeah. And so I think by being divided in that way and isolated, we lose our power, and we feel completely at the whim of these companies and the direction they'll take to dictate how we then get to live our lives.
Yeah. We haven't even started to talk about your restaurants yet, man. But
wasn't that the question?
Well, we're kind of setting the foundation of what your values are and what, I wanted to understand Rochester. I mean, growing up in Exeter, New Hampshire, where there, I would say, was probably a little bit more privilege in those areas. Probably because we're closer to Massachusetts, right over the border, and right off 95, so.
Well, you have a revenue generator in your town.
Well, we have Phillips Exeter Academy, which is also, so like I kind of came from a more privileged area, best school system in the state of New Hampshire. And I remember kind of coming up to Spalding High School to play football and just being like, what the fuck is going on in this town?
Mm-hmm.
So there was an issue with substance abuse. I remember seeing homeless people.
Right. This is what you asked me about originally.
Yeah, I mean, but no, I love where the conversation went. So, like, you were trying to fix that with Teatotaller. No.
Well, actually, no. So what was interesting is I was very unaware of the growing substance use, specifically opioid crisis that was happening in New Hampshire. Because I left, went away to school, college, grad school, etc. And so to me, by the time I even understood what substance use was, what opiates were, what drug epidemics were, I didn't have a lot of connections to my home. And so when I was literally still living in London, like making my logo and planning my menu of teas and whatever, I was just like, what I envisioned was, and somehow in my head I wasn't picturing Somersworth. I was probably picturing a big city, New York, London, where it's like, wouldn't it be cool if there were spaces that were open late but didn't serve alcohol? Not that it was deliberately like, you need to be sober. It's like, that's a recovery focused thing. More just that idea of like, oh, I love sitting in a cafe in, South London at 10 a.m. I wish this could also be open at 10 p.m. or 7 p.m. And so that was really the idea, was just a cafe that didn't serve alcohol. Many cafes don't. That sort of was like deliberately like had programming, was open late and so forth. So that was like,
find people like you.
Yeah. And I brought it back to my hometown of Somersworth, this very small town.
2011.
Completely sort of by the sort of chance of the universe, it ended up being a project that was happening in a community in New Hampshire that had been largely unfairly positioned as the epicenter of New Hampshire's opioid crisis. Somersworth. There were so many news stories that I, as I was just like starting to read the paper again, coming back home, reading Foster's, learning that like, another overdose or another drug bust in Somersworth. And, we had a pain care clinic where, like a pain clinic in Somersworth that went to court because they were over-prescribing painkillers, Oxycontin and so forth at the time.
Yeah.
Which was sort of just pushing pain meds into the communities and hooking people on pain meds and then driving the crisis further. And even in ways which I would hear from people like, in Portsmouth, other communities, like, oh, Somersworth has the drug problem. Like, that's how they sort of defined it, to both sort of protect them and their community. Like, oh, this isn't our thing.
Yeah.
And so, it's like that Route 16 thing. It's like, oh, the more north you drive on Route 16, like, every community has a worse and worse pet name or whatever you call it. It's like every community growing up can remember what like people used to call our town, what they used to call Rochester, etc. And that I suddenly found myself like, again, not deliberately having a mission around substance use and recovery, but being like, here I am that not only have a sober space, again, a lot of cafes are sober spaces, but a deliberately, explicitly sober space in a community where people were just starting to own that challenge. Mm. We had a drug task force 10, 15 years ago, that felt very unique. There was no drug task force when I was growing up, for the city to talk about like substance use. And so as people locally in the sort of Somersworth, Berwick, Rochester area were thinking about like, what do we do? Like our kids are getting addicted. Our kids are dying. People are losing their jobs, their home. It sort of is so destabilizing to a community. And it's also, there's so much stigma. Like nobody wants to talk about it. It feels very dirty. Nobody wants to like, oh, nope, it's not me. I don't have the problem. So then people are living in silence. People don't want to talk that their kids, are going through this. Then they're like getting incarcerated. And so Somersworth was suddenly reckoning with, we got to do something locally. We can't just kick the can or blame Rochester and then have it go more north or something. And so I just started getting a lot of connections to people that were working in the recovery community and also working in the harm reduction community. I mean, I remember there was a harm reduction group that was doing needle exchanges or syringe exchanges, and they came to me. They were doing one in, I think, Rochester at the time. They're like, hey, we want to do this in Somersworth, and we need to train our volunteers to like go out there and collect, needles and distribute, hand off clean, safe supplies, and nobody will let us host. Nobody wants, they think, ew, like, there's something you're pumping drugs.
Don't bring them in here.
Yeah, don't bring them in here, and you're pumping drugs into the communities.
Bad
and so
for
forth.
business.
Yeah, and I was like, first I just in general think of myself as a harm reduction person, which is to say, if you use science and evidence-based approaches to reduce harms, then that's a good thing. Even if it feels like you're enabling or you're encouraging or promoting, we look at the outcomes. And it was so clear to me, I lived in Canada for a little while, that harm reduction strategies like syringe exchanges are very effective. It just reduces the bad health outcomes. It reduces the number of syringes that are visible in your public streets and public parks, and it connects more people to services than would otherwise get connected. Not everyone is going to be ready to sign up into a recovery program, but more people will get connected to them when you have that. And so to me, I was like, this is a no-brainer. And yet there were so many people that just had that attitude about like, not in my backyard, don't bring it here. And so I like opened my space and let this group do their trainings.
Is this in 2011?
This would have been maybe 2015, 2016 by then. So this is sort of like a period of time that evolution and different connections. But throughout those years, we hosted all recovery AA kind of meetings.
Was this like a pivotal point in your business where things started to shift?
No, and just in the sense of like, so that I think was a bigger shift for me, becoming more aware of the epidemic in New Hampshire and who and what and how we would solve it and approach it.
I mean, one thing I just want to point out, and I wrote this down while you were talking, and it's something that I've learned. I think that we don't understand that if you want change to happen, change comes from the inside out. It comes from the individual level. If you want to improve yourself, there's nobody that's going to come to you and say, voila, I will make you improved. You have to make a choice, and you have to internalize a choice, a decision. You have to commit to it, and you have to start working on yourself. You have to become a better version of yourself. You need to lift yourself up. And you can't lift up a community until you've lifted yourself. You have to pull people up. You can't push them up. And if you want to change communities, it works the same way. If you want a community to change, you have to change at the individual level and choose to pull people up. If that means giving them needles so they can stay healthy, then that's what that means. And I understand how that's counterintuitive. Like I want this to go away. I don't want to feed them more needles, right? Yeah. But sometimes the solution is indirect. It's not as obvious as it seems. I do want to talk more about you and your journey, about how you because we're now in the year 2015. I think this will come back up as we keep going. But what were the challenges of getting open? You never owned a restaurant before.
No, I'd never owned a restaurant. I honestly had almost never worked in one. So many people I know that open a restaurant were like, oh yeah, I was a sous chef for 5 years and I apprenticed under some head chef, and then I was a head chef for a little bit, and then my friends, I bought the restaurant, I moved in. I bussed some tables and baked a little bit during summer jobs. I had never actually run an operation. I'd never even been around an operation long enough to see it run. And that is probably like the biggest reveal of this episode, is that I had no experience, or I had no job doing this.
How did you get the money to open a cafe?
Kickstarter.
Okay. How much money? Well, tell me about the space that you chose.
So this was all sort of just like, divine intervention, where I was moving home and I was like, I have this crazy idea, and really had no business running a business. Like, I didn't know what a pro forma was. I didn't know the difference between a startup budget and an operating budget. Like, I didn't know how much things cost. I didn't know that you had regulations and taxes and insurance and et cetera. But I had this like bug in my ear, and that I had this itch that I had to scratch. And so once I was like, I'm doing it, I start like looking for spaces, and I was like, oh my God, I can't pay $1,000 a month for anything. Like, I don't even have $1,000 in my bank account. How could I pay the first month's rent? And I found this space in Somersworth that was on, the back side of the town, directly across from an abandoned factory, a one-sided street full of empty storefronts. And of course, in my head, I didn't realize that location is important when you have a restaurant. I just thought, oh, well, I know my restaurant's here, so everyone in their head,
great. People will just
know it.
Yeah.
They'll be like, we've been waiting for Emmett to open this cafe. So I found this like empty space on the back side of town, and it had been years prior had been a restaurant. And so, I remember going in there, and it was like dark and dusty and dilapidated, but there was a hood in it.
Well, at least you knew that was going to be a big savings, or maybe you didn't even realize that.
Well, long story short, I didn't even need a hood. Look around, I don't have a hood here. But in my head, I was just like, well, it has a kitchen, so it must be like $5 more, and we're open. And so, and it was like, the landlord was like very checked out and like sort of very not absentee. He was like physically present, but like didn't care. And so I must have paid $400 a month for like an 800 square foot space.
Does that include everything?
No, didn't include anything.
Well, but see, this include everything. 800 square feet was 800 square feet of kitchen and dining room.
Oh yeah, the whole space. Yeah, it was slightly bigger than this space. And again, like I didn't even know what it costs to heat a space. I didn't know what I don't know. I'd never once paid an electric bill in my life. Because I'd been at school, and so to me it didn't matter what the operating costs were going to be, because I thought the startup costs were the costs, because then the day you open, you make all the money and it doesn't matter. So it's $400. And so I, in my infinite wisdom, was like, I bet I can open a cafe restaurant for $5,000. And so I launched a Kickstarter. Maybe it was I think it was 8,000. So I launched a Kickstarter. Kickstarter had just hit the scene. It was like, I came up with a board game, and if you give me $20, I'll give you the board game when I complete it, for crowdsourcing. But I was like, oh, if you give me $20, I'll blend you some tea or bake you a cake or something. And so I was successful, and then I did raise $8,000 or something. You can still find the video on Kickstarter or YouTube. It's like very embarrassing. And got the money. And then I was like, okay, I signed the lease. I'm opening. Here's my logo. Here's my website. I told everyone, like, stay tuned in 2 or 3 months or whatever. And within, like, a week, spent all the money.
What'd you spend all the money on?
Just, like, equipment. I bought a fridge and I bought an espresso machine. And I bought everything used, which is, like, the never, ever, 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 ever buy used refrigeration. It's like, if I could tell...
It's the one thing they say, get new.
Do not do it. If someone's listening, they're like, well, this is half price. Don't do it. You're going to pay for it. You'll pay for it sooner than you think.
Buy hardware, countertops, display units.
Anything else can be used, sure.
Not refrigeration.
Not refrigeration. Do not do it.
Yeah.
You don't really know what mold is until you see what mold, And so I just bought everything used, and I was like, okay, so I spent it all. And then somehow got to opening day. There was definitely a lot of like donated sweat equity. Like my dad's friend was like, I'll help you do construction, to build the bar. There were some like fixtures that already kind of were in place from the space, but it's like we had to do some changes. I think he just never billed me. He never even, like, he would go to Home Depot and, he was just helping out. Definitely my parents or other friends would just show up and they're like, brought a bunch of crafts or something.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I don't know where they got them or who'd pay for them. They didn't bill me. So there was definitely like some additional bleed. And somehow, maybe I had like some money left over for my student loans. I didn't spend it all on my tuition. And so
How much?
It might have been $4,000 more.
Okay, so altogether, all in, you have $12,000 to open this.
Yeah, definitely less than 15 total.
How much did it end up costing you? Unless I'm cutting you short.
Well, it's hard to say because the way that I ended up, when something broke or when, it was just that I didn't make any money personally.
Right.
So it's like once I was operating, it was hard to say, was this just a capital cost that I never calculated? And I had no concept about creating a cushion for capital costs. Like you make sure you raise, you have $20,000 afloat, or you have what do they say, like 4 payroll cycles or whatever.
I've heard
reserves
they say at least minimum 6 months of operating capital to operate
I will never
in
have
the red.
that much money in the world
I say
to open a new one.
If you can do a year, that's probably better. If you have, for some reason,
we should have talked before I did
to do 2 years, like get 2 years. But that's the thing, like. I think when you learn these things over time and that you realize that if you think it's going to cost $500,000, it's really going to cost $1.5 million.
Well, and the reality is, which is the other side of this, if I were smart enough to know these things, I never would have done it.
Right.
I never would have opened.
What up, unstoppable restaurant owners and operators? We have to interrupt today's video to let you know that Restaurant Unstoppable and Restaurant Systems Pro, we're taking our relationship to the next level. Beginning in July of 2024, Fred Langley, CEO of Restaurant Systems Pro, is making himself available once a week in Restaurant Unstoppable Network to answer all of your restaurant systems questions, whether it's the profit margins. He will look at your P&L. Bring your P&L. He will take a look at that. He will dissect it. He will help you find your profit, whether that be through budgeting, inventory management, costing recipe cards, labor, checklists, you name it. He is a master of restaurant systems, and he's making himself available to you. Fred Langley and Restaurant Systems Pro started as a consulting firm, and for over 16 years, they've been helping their clients increase their profit by 10% or more. What are you waiting for? Click the link below to join our Facebook group, Restaurant Unstoppable Network.
I mean, I'm hoping that with this podcast, we inspire to help people who really want to do it and understand what it's going to take, and also inspire people to not do it if they are, clueless. I mean, there's a lot of people that get into this industry and fail. I mean, if we can help protect people from themselves by helping them become aware of what's actually going to... Do you really want it? Do you? I think there's a service in that.
Well, I think the industry, especially because the industry is tougher, I think, in some ways than it was economically, that it then self-selects for the type of restaurant owners and types of entrepreneurs that are not good at forecasting consequences.
Because it is more difficult to run a restaurant, it self-selects people who are good or who are not good at... Wait, I don't know if I picked up. Say that one more time.
That if you are someone that is good at forecasting consequences, you're like, I have no idea, but here's all the things that means over 6 months, over 1 year, over 5 years. Like, I'm going to have to delay getting a house, or we can't start a family, or I'm going to have to get a second mortgage. Like, if you're good at that kind of forecasting, then you're going to then decide in the first instance, this isn't for me, I'm not going to do it.
Right.
But the people that aren't good at doing that, the people that are like, I have a great idea, and I bet I'm going to make $1 million in my first year, and oh my God, it's like, you're going to then say yes. You're going to sign that lease. You're going to tie yourself to needing to proceed, even if you haven't been able to fully estimate and forecast what the downsides are going to be, both economic
you're too far
downsides.
In that you just have to keep going.
And I am absolutely, or at least have been, someone who has no way of forecasting consequences. Another way of describing that is I'm optimistic.
Yeah.
That I just think things will work out. Things are good. Things are worth doing.
I think there's some truth to that too. And I think that the cool thing about life is that it has the ability to sway probability. all life has the ability to display probability, and humans are probably one of the best creatures at making this happen, where if something's completely improbable, you will conjure up a way to make it probable.
You're like, it has
you
to
will
happen.
will that shit into existence. And I think there's some truth to that, like staying optimistic and just don't, if you tell yourself that it's not possible, then your frontal lobe literally switches off and you just say, I'm done. I throw my hands up. But if you say it is possible, the frontal lobe starts creating. It starts thinking. It starts finding, like life does. It finds a way to make to exist.
It also, though, forces you into situations where you make sacrifices that you wish you wouldn't have made.
Resentment is a real thing.
Yeah, and just like, oh, okay, I'm gonna open a cafe for $5,000, $10,000. In a town of no sort of cultural interest in local
excess
shopping,
income to support this.
yeah,
maybe?
without any extra float. Okay, well then you're going to have to sacrifice all of your weekends, and you're never going to buy a home, and you're never going to start a family. It's like my 20s were the sunk cost. My 20s were the how I paid for the improbability of it.
Yeah. So you're getting into the challenges. The challenge. What were the first couple of years like in terms of, is it just like trying to fix what was broken, replace what you didn't consider, all these additional liabilities?
It was definitely a lot of drudgery. It was definitely a lot of toil. It was like very exciting. I still to this day remember like opening night and being like, wow, I built something. It is real. I feel like a lot of people, again, I was young, like in college and school, I was always someone that thought like, I can't finish what I start, and like I have an idea for a project and I don't ever complete it, and oh no, like woe is me. And so to actually like stand outside of my cafe and see the sign and see the lights and see that there were people inside was a very intoxicating and magical experience, to be like, I built it. And then shortly thereafter, reality sunk in that like I had $60 in my bank account, and like every day I thought you're supposed to be busy on day one. I literally remember I had a grand opening, like all the people coming in. I think I made $100 on grand opening, which for a 22-year-old, 23-year-old was a lot of money. And I remember there was some guy that had come to the grand opening. I didn't know him or know him very well. And he was like, how was it? I was like, it was great. I made $100 today. And if I just do this every day, this is going to work really well. And he looked at me, he's like, you don't ever do what you did on your grand opening. And of course, knowing that $100 is not even enough to turn on the lights, whatever. To me, there was like this, I think at the time I was sort of very proud, and I had a lot of, I was like, whatever, like I'm going to do it. And I think about that because I was like, oh, he was so right. It's like we did like $40 a day, for months. And that just required... I was there all, I thought in my head, I was like, well, I'll hire a bunch of people and that will do it. I think I had like one part-timer early on. It was a high school student, so she like helped me on weekends. And otherwise it was me. It was just me.
What were your specific struggles early on to get to the point? Like how long did it take you to get to the point where you say doing $100 a day?
Well, so just to kind of give like a larger arc of Teetotaler first. So we were open in this like kind of like nosebleed, back, rough around the edge of space. For 2.5 years, closed, moved to a bigger space in downtown Somersworth.
So 2011 to, when did you close?
2013,
then
I think 2014, and then we opened in 2016.
Okay, so 3 years in between closing and reopening, or 2.5 years-ish.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so there's been kind of stops and goes. So this first surge of the Teetotaler was a failure, in the sense that it's still going today, so it's not technically a failure. You failed forward, you evolved, you're better today, but you had to close the shop for more than a year.
Yeah, well, so basically the way it worked is, we were, I'm like one of those business owners that says we, but I'm a sole proprietorship. We had this great idea. We were very good at telling a good story about who we were. And, I don't mean that deceptively. I mean, like, we were just telling, like, we were this, kind of eccentric, queer, sober space in a community like Somersworth. And we got a lot of goodwill and brand equity. Like a lot of people, I would say from Portsmouth, loved Teetotaller, but had never been. You know, they just heard the story like, oh, we love what Emmett's doing in Somersworth. They'd never come in, or not at least regularly. And so
30 minutes is a far way to drive for a coffee.
Okay, whatever. I spent my childhood driving to Portsmouth for Bold Moose Music. You guys could drive 25 minutes to come for, you know, classic Earl Grey. Anyway, so at one point, so there were things that were successful about it, even if the success was not borne out in my bank account and my take-home pay or anything.
You developed a great brand that resonated with the target market, that saw and wanted you, but it would just, the location wasn't right.
Yeah, and the sophistication wasn't there, like the way of pricing things and marketing.
So you learned a lot during this first 3 years.
I learned a lot.
Biggest lessons. Keep going on that vein.
And so someone came into the shop, was like, I heard about Teetotaller, like, I like what you're doing. And he was like, I am looking to buy a building in downtown Somersworth that has just like been, you know, come up for sale. And I would love to have a cafe. And it's like right in the heart of the town. It's across from City Hall. Would you be interested in moving? And to me, that felt like a ticket of taking all the good that I have done and resetting all of the bad or the mistakes or whatever, that like I knew what I was currently doing was not sustainable, like economically for myself.
How did that make you feel to know that? Did you like, what were you feeling in that moment?
When I talked to this person or before?
Just prior to knowing that you're in a situation.
Oh, I was so depressed. I was like so lonely. I was exhausted all the time. You know, like I would have like maybe Mondays and Tuesdays off, and like I would just drive out of town. Like I would go drive down to Boston, and I would sit at a cafe or some, you know, like just do anything other. Like I wasn't then going and figuring out how to improve the business. I was so checked out. Just
making your brain be still.
Yeah, because so much of once I was there was operational, and you're constantly behind. You're always behind, and I had no help. You know, I had like help. I had a couple staff, and I had help. I had like friends and family, but I had no help. There was no one, you know. For a while, I did have like a partner, like a business partner, and that was like actually like I can share some of the you know, the way I always
two brains is better than one.
Exactly, like because the way I always describe it is like people ask, like, I want to open a business. I'm like, don't go alone. And the reason is there's obviously a lot of benefits. It's that when you get into bed at night, literally no one else on earth is getting into bed at night caring about the problems of your business. No one is. They might care about you. They may be like, Emmett, you need work-life balance. Or they might care about like, I hope I get more hours if you're staff. No one is caring about, I need to fix that broken plumbing issue or whatever. So having a partner was like, somebody else is thinking about the plumbing or whatever. And, you know, that worked well until it didn't. And I think the reason it ultimately didn't is we weren't making a lot. We weren't a successful financial business, so it really wasn't worth it. I mean, being a business partner in a struggling financial business is just taking on a liability. Mm-hmm. And so when this person was like, "Well, I'm gonna open a new space," to me, I was like, there are a lot of things I like about this business. There are a lot of things I like about the brand and what it offers for Somersworth and for my own journey. And I can kind of like hit reset on all the things I've like just screwed up or forgot how to do or didn't know how to do, with whether it relates to the menu or the decor or whatever. And I think if someone had owned a successful business and wanted to move it, they would keep their business open until the new one. For me, I thought this is a great way to recoup.
To shake the Etch-a-Sketch and start over and do it in a way that makes sense for me.
And also stop the bleeding. You know, like just put a pause on, like, I don't have to work 60 hours a week to then make $2 an hour or whatever I was making. I can actually just pause. You know, I actually ended up getting a part-time job, sort of like a more office type job, and reimagine.
So this person said, we have a space across from City Hall in Concord, you said it was?
No, in Somersworth.
Somersworth. So same city, better location.
Mm-hmm.
And from the time that you closed the original location in 2013 to when you reopened, how much time went by?
I think it was a year and a half.
A year and a half.
Because we closed in December of 2013, I believe.
Is this location where Folded is today?
Yes.
Okay. And it was a much bigger footprint, or they blew out a wall, so it's probably not quite as big as it was now, right?
When we opened Folded, we blew out a wall. So it was so Teetotaller was smaller than what Folded is.
Okay. During this year and a half off, I mean, when you got this opportunity and you chose to take it, like, what were you feeling in that moment?
Absolutely. This is a way of taking what I valued in my business and improving it and holding on to it.
What was your vision forward from that point?
I think at any moment, I always was that optimistic person. And so at that point, I was like, oh, this is when Teetotaller is going to take off. This is when it's going to be that big, whatever big meant at the time. And it's going to be perfect. And I'm like, I'm so much smarter now, and I'm so much better at doing this.
Wise.
I'm so wise.
In my mid-20s versus my early 20s.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, it allowed me, I think, to fall in love with the business again. Like when I was opening the first Teetotaller, 2011, prior to it opening, I woke up every day at 6 a.m. ready to go. Yeah. I was just so motivated and excited. Like I have never been a particularly handy person, but I was like with the power drill and with the Sawzall. I was just excited to go and solve problems and paint these walls and like design these things. And then I got into this drudgery toil place of like, oh God, if I have to make another batch of scones that I have to throw out at the end of the day, I'm done. And so that reset allowed me to fall in love with the aspects I like again, because I knew that if I resented the business and that work, that it was not going to work out.
Right. So this reset, you fall back in love. What do you do differently during the reset? When was it was
2016.
16? What month?
Well, we opened, I think, in April or May of 2016, but so the project was like 2015, late 2015 into 2016.
Okay. Were you in debt going into this new one?
No.
So where did you get the money this time?
So I got a little savvier and realized from conversations with other people that landlords and developers will often put in allowance for retail businesses, which was a novel idea to me. And so part of the arrangement that I had with the landlord, with the developer, because it wasn't just he owned a building. He was buying it and like redesigning this building.
Tenant improvements.
Yeah, to also have a residential upstairs. So he knew that the building's value was really going to be kept in the rent from the residential. And so both that meant like a better cut on rent. I mean, my rent was going to go up because I'm in a much better location, but it was like below market.
Bigger square footage too.
Bigger square footage, yep, about double the size. And that he would, through his development of the building, get me really beyond a vanilla box. Like not only would he deliver a clean new vanilla box, he was going to put in all of the outlets that I wanted. He was going to put in the plumbing that I needed. He was, so it was really in that way a partnership of activating this building. And so much of the cost, maybe $100,000, was maybe a little bit less than that, was sort of put onto the landlord. I did raise some money. We did a crowdsourcing program. I want to say I maybe raised $30,000.
What was that platform? Through what platform did you use?
I did it on my own. So, because to me, I did that whole Kickstarter thing, raised $8,000, and then Kickstarter took 10%. And I was like, well, I found them all. It wasn't like someone in Oklahoma was excited to see it.
You just used that platform to be the transaction.
So I was still into crowdsourcing, but I was like, well, I don't want to lose any of it. So we basically, I pitched. It was sort of I think it was if you give me $5,000, we will name a tea after you, or it was something like that. And I think was able to get 6 people.
How many of these teas are still those teas today?
We've rebranded all of them. Don't even look over there.
So one thing I want to point out that I think is an underlying lesson that I pulled up is that, if you start with a good purpose and a good brand and you're clear on your identity and who you want to appeal to, you will attract onto yourself your fans. And those fans could be potential investors. They could be the person that likes your brand and wants to see it somewhere else. So having that clarity, putting time and energy into building something that has legs and is seen and valued by somebody, and it isn't just a whack-a-mole situation, but intentional. And it sounds like from day one you were very intentional with the space that you were trying to create, the values you had. Safe to say?
I would say that I like hearing that, but the answer is no.
Okay.
You know, I think a lot of people see the result of what Teetotaller is today and think, wow, it must have been like, there must have been a mastermind that says, I want this sort of very intentional, value-based, queer, sober, flamboyant, campy, fun, colorful, bold space. This is like the 10th iteration of me not knowing what I'm doing. And in fact, many of the elements that people have really attached onto with my brand have really been driven by the community and the staff that have like allowed it to find its way. Like probably the defining moment for my brand's adjustment is in 2017, we did a billboard in Somersworth that was like very campy and very gay. And it was like, you know, right next to, it was down the street from a church, and it was like, you know, kind of sent, everyone was sort of up in arms about it. And that definitely defined, that was a defining moment for the brand. That's, I think, changed the trajectory of what we were doing.
Okay, so it kind of stirred things up. It created awareness.
Yes.
Back to 2016, April 2016, I think you said it was, April, May. You relaunch, you get a little bit more savvy on how you can partner with people to... This individual that you partnered with, did they ever tell you why you? What it was about you and what you were doing at your original location where he wanted to recruit you to that new location?
I think he wanted to... I mean, we were like, you know, we became friends, became close. And then he was also someone that had some aspiration. He worked in the restaurant industry. He had more experience in the restaurant industry than I did. And he had some interest in, you know, like, oh, one day I'll want to open something or whatever. And sort of, I think in many ways saw that I was like struggling because we were close. I was able to be a little bit more sort of vulnerable. And so he was like, oh, well, this could be a way that I could get a footing. And again, we were both young. So it's like, you know, you think like this is going to strike it big. So I think he was, you know, attracted to the brand, but also was attracted to the idea that he could help sort of shape the brand. Because it was very clear, you know, looking back, Teetotaller circa 2012 was a very unformed idea. Like, it did not have what you see now from offerings, from brand, from the colors to the menu, you name it. And so I think you wouldn't recognize it, really. And so anyone coming in there was like, wow, this place has a lot of potential.
Right. So it sounds like he liked you. You developed a relationship with him, and he liked you, who you were, who your values were, and he wanted to help you.
Yes.
Okay. So 2016, you're in this new space. You've learned these new lessons on how to get the money. You raised $30,000. You crowdfunded that money. How long were you in that space for?
In 2016?
Yeah.
From 2016 until folded, which...
2020.
No, 2023,
actually.
2? I think we...
Yes. October 2022, I want to say. And then Mark came on by like March or February of 2023?
We closed in January of 2023.
Okay.
Teetotaller did. I mean, we were closed during COVID, but yeah.
Got it. So 7 years you were at that location. 16 to 23.
But closed for 2 years during COVID.
Oh, right. So during that time from 16 to 2020, that 4-year period, what was your evolution as a restaurateur?
Definitely, it was more polished. It was definitely more of a restaurant. You know, we served, our menu was bigger. We had a bigger staff.
What'd you have on the menu? Was it still just baked goods, or were you doing sandwiches and things like that too?
We did breakfast sandwiches, waffles, pressed sandwiches, salads, soups.
What is your menu today?
It's different in both locations.
Okay.
Which is like a challenge. So here, where we're sitting, it's, you know, very sort of small, scaled down version. So the drink menu is the same, you know, espresso, boba, lemonades, teas, chais, pastries, and then like toasts and like, you know, toasted stuff. Some grab and go stuff like overnight oats. In Concord, it's all of that plus breakfast sandwiches and sandwiches.
Got it.
Lunch sandwiches.
So you evolved the offering, the food offering. What about profitability and running your business? How did you change how you ran your business the second time around?
Well, the second time around, which is the one in downtown Somersworth,
16 to 2020.
I had gotten a part-time job, outside of it when I was like closed to make money, and that turned into a full-time job, which was like an office job. So it was like a salary. And at that point, I sort of made what I would say in hindsight the mistake of not wanting to give that up and not wanting to give up Teetotaller. And so what I ended up doing was hiring a manager. And I would say Teetotaller, the space, the location, etc., was not ready. Was not strong enough.
What was it missing
for that? Just like from a traffic perspective, that it could not afford what a manager.
You weren't doing the volume to
we weren't doing the volume.
Costs.
But to me, I was like, well, I like it, and I have a salary that's paying my rent and my bills, so that it's worth even if this company is in the red. And so we were in the red for many years. For large, payroll was our biggest cost. And I just did not have the sort of focus and concentration to say, you know what, you need to choose. You either need to just say, hey, you know what, I like my office tech job or whatever. I'm going to keep doing this, work 9 to 5, give PTO, whatever, and I have to close this project, this business that I have. Or I need to be completely inside my business to see what it needs to grow it, to get it to a place. I kind of, maybe it was pride and maybe it was fear, where I was like, I want both. And so I'm even willing to pay for both, which happened.
Pride of what you created in fear of losing security?
I think, yeah. I mean, that was, yeah. Pride of what I had. And I'm a business owner, and fear of losing a lifestyle that I was beginning to get a taste of.
Yeah. Ultimately, you chose Teetotaller.
It took me a lot longer.
When did you make that decision to go all in?
Well, I would say COVID made it for me.
Right. So you closed. So paint the picture of where Teetotaller was in January of 2019.
That was actually kind of our glory days, because we had just done this billboard campaign. We became really known as a queer space, which was very unique to New Hampshire, and we were slowly seeing better improved traffic. And
can you share some numbers with me about where you were financially in terms of top line revenue?
I would have to actually dig. We probably were 200 to 250 annual gross revenue.
Were you still operating in the black at that, or the red at that point?
It was very spotty.
Okay.
For the time, when I had a manager, absolutely in the red.
Got it.
And I only know that because I would have to dip.
How much money were you making at your full-time job?
Probably in 2017, I was probably making $90,000.
That's pretty good. What were you doing?
So I worked for a technology company. I worked for a couple different startups. At the time, I was working for a company that was based in DC that we actually recruited, and they opened an office here in Dover.
What were you doing, though?
I was a marketing and product person.
I was film and anthropology. What the fuck were you doing for a tech company?
So I got a job initially when I was between teetotallers. I got a marketing job at a tech company part-time, where I basically wrote email blasts.
Got it.
And I knew how to do that because I was writing email blasts for Teetotaller.
Yeah.
And that then just led me to other roles that
proved yourself.
Yeah, and I also I was young enough and savvy enough, sort of a digital native, where I knew how to build a website. And some startup companies, if they're being founded by people in their 40s, they hadn't seen how quick and easy it was. And so I was sort of able to market my skills that way. And so ended up getting a full-time marketing position. That was more money than I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
And I was still in my 20s. And virtually all of it went to covering any losses. Not that I had losses there were some months where I was in the black or some months I broke even, but overall for sure was in the red.
Gotcha. So you decide that either you're taking this cush, the security, or you are going all in with your passion project, your pride, and you're doubling down on Teetotaller. You closed during the pandemic.
So I had already left my job. My job ended because of sort of similarly because of COVID, right around early 2020. And so
your job had ended, your full-time job.
Yeah, my separate full-time job.
You got laid off?
No, the job I was doing at the time was based in Central African Republic, and which is a sort of conflict and war-torn country. And separately, the security situation there got out of hand, and so we weren't able to continue the program. And so I was literally, the February of 2020, not certain that we would even be able to continue raising money because we weren't able to administer the program. So I was already starting to have these okay, I might have to have no job, and I might have to go back in, or I might have to just go get another job. And as those kind of conversations were coming forward, COVID happened, which both meant travel was canceled. So then it was okay, clearly this project, it was called Farmers First, was over because we literally can't go and administer the program. And then separately, there was a couple weeks where I guess we have lots of masks and hand sanitizer, and then, or no, there wasn't masks at the time. There was a lot of hand sanitizer, and then it was boom, you got to close. And so I suddenly went from having two jobs, a job and a business, to having nothing.
Got it. When did you reopen? I mean, you closed, so we don't have to talk about the evolution during that time. But when you reopened, how did you reinvent yourself, if at all?
Well, while we closed, I started a beverage delivery company called Doorstep Boba, which was basically delivering teetotalers bubble tea to the community, and it was very successful.
How, paint the picture of successful?
We probably did almost $100,000 in boba sales.
Wow. What were your operational costs associated with that?
Working 2 days a week, gas, driving around, 2 employees,
So were you making the boba at the location and then just shipping it to...
We literally drove it around in cars.
Okay, that's cool. Were they all put into their individual containers, or how did that work? Were you pouring the boba on site?
This was actually in many ways sort of felt like my sort of most entrepreneurial time, where I was it was right when COVID hit, we had to close down, and it was right before St. Patrick's Day, and every St. Patrick's Day we always had a Shamrock Boba special. And I was oh no, we have to cancel the Shamrock Boba special. We already had customers, whatever. And I was well, why don't I just deliver it and see what happens? And I put up a little ad and a payment link to buy it. And we had 70 people want Shamrock Boba, which is $5 or $6. And so I just that morning on March 17th or whenever it was, made a bunch of boba, drove it around Somersworth, Rochester, Dover. And I was I could do this again. And so the next week I was chai boba or something. And it was just sort of formed out of its own, it only built off of success. I wasn't doing anything that was it's going to work. I was I'll only sell as much makes sense. Or if I'm what, it doesn't make sense to drive to Durham.
Just start and let it grow.
Yeah, we just sort of grew organically. And again, it was a time when everyone was scared and alone and at home and uncertain. And so it's getting, and there was sort of no end to when the window of opportunity was. They're not I need this at this minute. So it's when you get boba delivered at 2 p.m., you're that's great. That's an exciting treat. And so, yeah, I just sort of built a little business around it.
The tapioca boba or the bubble boba, the pop?
Both, and then it got so, we started delivering to several towns. We were also in the process of opening Concord before COVID.
Okay.
Which that kind of all shut down. So then we started delivering Doorstep Boba to Concord. And then we started diversifying our product. So it's I started buying donuts from this company and distributing donuts and chocolate from this company. We use New Hampshire Donut Company, which is actually now, years later, our neighbor in Concord. We use a chocolate company that was in Somersworth. We used a pretzel company that was in Somersworth. So we just sort of started we were like this treat delivery to your doorstep.
Collaborating with other companies, supporting other companies, businesses.
And it was all like, it wasn't like we were using Uber. So there was no like other delivery fee or anything. It was just like all internal. We were shipping. Yeah, it was actually kind of a cool time.
When did boba come on site for you? Was that always a part of the original offering?
Yeah, we'd have boba. I mean, I can't say in 2011, but certainly by 2012 we had boba.
Which is a unique selling proposition, especially then. Even today, it's a unique selling proposition.
It certainly was then, and definitely during COVID, boba had like a zeitgeist moment. Like it was just became more popular. And so by the time we reopened after COVID, people thought we were a boba shop.
Yeah.
Even though we had the same menu before and the same menu after. It just, both what happened during COVID and our doorstep operation kind of changed our brand in a lot of people's mind.
Well, you're always a tea shop, but boba is just like an iteration of tea, right? That nobody was doing. I can't think of any place in New Hampshire that was doing boba around that.
There were a handful, but
Really?
but not many. Yeah.
Right. So how is that tea delivery thing still going today?
No.
Okay. When did that stop?
So we reopened physical space, the cafe in Somersworth in May of 21.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, we were closed a little over a year.
3 years ago. A little over 3 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's 21.
3.5 years ago.
Yes, it was 21. And we continued to do the delivery, and it just became too cumbersome. And also because people's schedules started changing, they were like, well, I do need this delivered at this time.
And people
They were less
weren't
flexible.
I think the public wasn't as consumed with staying entertained at home.
Yeah, it wasn't as much of a novelty.
Right. So, okay. When you come back in 2021, you are at your second location, meaning like not your OG location, but your new location of
in
Somersworth. You're opening a second location in Concord. When did that open?
That opened in April of 2022.
Okay. This time around, what's new? How are you evolving?
Raised more capital.
Okay. How did you get the capital this time?
So I used Mainvest at the time, which was a platform based on the Jobs Act, which allowed for unaccredited investors to invest in and support small businesses. You know, prior you would need accredited investor, someone with $1 million in assets, et cetera. So this allowed someone like me to solicit for investments from, you know, friends and family and so forth. And Mainvest was a platform that kind of handled all of that.
Mainvest. I think to be Main Street, I had them on the show. They unfortunately closed down, which sucks because I thought it was a genius. What do you think about that? How did you even know about Mainvest?
Well, when I worked at that company doing email marketing circa 2013, I worked with, or I, sort of not at the same company, but someone who worked at Uber early days named Nick. We interacted because of something our startup was doing. He then went on to found.
I had Nick on the show.
Mainvest. Oh my gosh, yeah. No, he's a great guy.
Yeah.
So we had just sort of kept in touch, and he was sort of following my journey as a brick and mortar entrepreneur. And then when we were like seeking more capital, whatever, he's like, I went down to their offices in Salem, got a whole pitch. And I was like, yeah, I've obviously used crowdsourcing before. I really like this idea that it gives some skin in the game to investors. It gives you sort of a built-in, audience of ambassadors, and potentially can raise more money that's less expensive than traditional financing. Because at the time I was ineligible for any bank financing.
Right. So was the experience with Mainvest overall good?
Wonderful.
Why did they close? I've heard why they closed, but I'm curious from your.
I mean, I don't know anything other than, sort of what's been reported. I certainly think, it is a hard, knowing how much they did, like sort of the financial services that they provided ongoing is very expensive. That if you're not really, your revenue is only based on when someone opens a new business. And like, that's like a not, it's not you're not buying coffee. It's not happening every single day. So, I don't know.
I think it was just undercapitalized.
Yeah, I sort of have to imagine that they weren't seeing the cash flow to then cover
their liabilities to keep the businesses going. Because it needs to, like you need to support these businesses, that you're taking on, that you're giving them instruction, you're giving them consultation, you're helping them figure out repayment plans that work. And that's what I heard, is that they were just basically undercapitalized and they couldn't keep it going.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. Did that affect your business? So how much money were you able to raise with Mavis?
I think I raised $65,000-$70,000, something like that.
Okay. So what were you using the $65,000 for?
So when I was opening Concord, again, I was even working with a larger developer, and I was much more savvy about like, here's what I want for tenant allowance, here's the space, whatever. And so I had a sense that that was probably $100,000 of tenant allowance, and so I raised $65-$70K for like that didn't. The allowance didn't include equipment, so like I was getting
assets
my equipment, assets that I owned,
things
decor,
that aren't nailed to like or part of the building.
Yeah, the boba sealer, the refrigeration,
anything that can be removed easily when you leave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and I also, I think, it's hard to say like, because I raised the money back in 2019, and the project was going to open Concord, and then during COVID, the building we were going to open in got sold.
Okay.
And so we actually had to like move and change, so there was sort of like, was not really good about estimating how much the transition might have cost us. So I think part of it, like we actually ended up having a little bit more of a float than we needed in the end. But yeah, we spent it on mugs and merchandise, and
so today you're 15% profit approximately, doing $700,000 a year between both locations, total gross.
Yeah, I would have to wait to see the end. So we haven't been open a year here,
right?
And so it's a seasonal thing,
right?
So it might be 10.
Got it. What changed to get to that point, to go from barely making money to
location?
Concord
has always done well.
Okay. So, and that happened in 2022.
22, yeah.
And how long have you been in this location here? Where we're now in Dover.
Yeah, 10 months.
10 months.
9 months? 10 months.
10 months. And why did you leave Somersworth?
Well, there's a couple things. So I opened in Concord, and, just instantly a busier market. I think we did $50,000 in our first month.
Wow.
Which I've never done. And to be honest, I've never done since, so that's sort of grand opening effect. But just like the level was so different from doing like 15,000 to doing 50,000.
Rebranded too?
Same brand.
Okay.
Same
colors, same.
Yeah. Again, maybe like cleaner, more refined and whatever, polished. In some ways not. I remember the night before opening in Concord, I was like, I don't have any tables.
Whoops.
I was like literally like painting office table furniture to make it seem cool. Some of that is still there. So you still making mistakes 15 years in, but it was busier, and and I had a manager, and it did enough to cover that, to hold on to that. And so that helped me kind of keep even. I had gotten another job, and that was really like after COVID. So separate job, separate tech company.
Doing what this time?
Similar job in terms of like marketing and product stuff, but this was for a forest carbon data company.
Okay.
Based in Italy.
Interesting.
Yes.
Okay. So, and then you also ran for office at one point along the line.
One time was during COVID, so I didn't have a lot going on, and then one was very recently, and I had a lot going on.
Knowing what you know about business now, how you run your business now, having other jobs, and while being able to still run a business. Well, like you there's clearly some level of evolution on operations on your end, right? Not only are you able to hold a full-time job, own 2 cafes, make time for podcast interviews, and run for office.
Well, this is like a quick 10-minute interview.
Right. I know, right? Did I say it was going to be a 10-minute interview?
You said it was going to be 2 hours.
Yeah, I know. I was like, warning, we go deep. paint the picture of your systems today, your operations today. Like, are you leaning on technology? Like, what does your training look like? Is there operations manuals? Like, how does the ship stay afloat?
And I know we're sort of jumping around here, but so running for office this year, so I had 2 locations. I had Dover and I had Concord. And then I ran for office, which at first is sort of like, I'm not running for Congress. I wasn't running for governor. Like, it's not a full-time job. I mean, certainly should you get elected, it's not full-time. So at first it was kind of like, okay, like figuring things out here and there.
What were you running for?
I was running for the governor's executive council.
Got it.
Which is, 1/5 of the state. By June, maybe July, I was totally consumed by it. I mean, in some ways purely because my district went from here where we're sitting up to the Canadian border. So it was just so much travel and so many meetings and just so much, because elections are urgent. It's like you have to do all this stuff before election day, whether it's ads or marketing or mailers or canvassing, whatever it might be. It's just like it absorbs. And so largely was sort of checked out of maybe not the operations, but checked out of the growth of my company. And I don't even know if it fully occurred to me how much that was until the election was over and I didn't get elected. And I had all this free time back, or at least this time back that I realized wasn't free time. And I think even if you ask my staff, they'd be like, oh, in the week or 2 since the election, Emmett has been so much more, not only like physically around, but like, okay, let's finally fix that drain or let's update those products, or there's an issue on the schedule. It's like I've just been so much more attentive to it. And so I don't have a regrets about it in the sense of like I really believed in the campaign. I believed in my candidacy and the opportunity there, and would have done it again. But I do realize that it came at a cost. Yeah. And it came at a cost of deferring a lot of the growth or decisions I would otherwise want to be making with my business.
Do you think that by being forced to delegate, it kind of almost forced an evolution in you, where now that you were forced to go to those terms within your business to be able to do it all, that now you're stronger because of it?
Maybe. I think time will tell. I think I'm probably still. One thing I struggle with is that I've been doing this for a very long time, 15 years, and yet in other ways I feel like I just started. Like I feel like I'm just figuring it out now.
So how
it's hard to wrestle knowing it's like, oh my God, Emmett, what has taken you so long? But
what has taken you so long? If you could distill that, knowing what you know now. I don't think it took you that long, for the record. But that's what you feel.
No, but I certainly feel. I feel like I'm just now figuring out what it would look like to grow the business.
What does that look like?
To be more sustainable. And sustainability is both a profitability thing. It's like a financial thing. It's also a staffing model. Like, I don't want anyone that works here to feel like this is constant toil.
Right.
And there are certainly places that are super busy. They got a line out the door and they're packed. And, the people that clock in, you just have to like turn into a mindless robot because it's just like so much chaos. I don't want that.
Yeah.
I want there to be pleasure and fun in doing it. I also am not shy about talking to the team about like, this is work, this is not a break to be working here, but I want it to be enjoyable. And it's like, how do you build something that both delivers an end result, which requires hard work, but doesn't then make anyone feel like completely exhausted or drained and so forth. And so, and I want that for myself and I want that for my team.
So you pose the question, what's the answer?
What was the question?
The question, how do you build something that creates safe space? People are finding pleasure, but they're also like work is being done and we're making money.
Well, there is a reality that I have learned is that you do have to be busy enough for it to be easy. There's like being slow is a killer.
Right.
It just drains. It causes problems. It drains you, and then it's like, and then suddenly when you're like, you feel the squeeze on like, someone's like, well, why haven't we fixed this drain? You're like, because I can't afford a plumber. Like you need to be busy enough to be able to address everything that might be getting in the way of a more well-oiled machine.
So what did you start doing differently to be busy enough?
Well, I'm in the process of it, I think. I think over time is just like the brand is more well-known. The communities that I exist in have slowly been getting, New Hampshire is one of the, highest or hottest housing markets. So it's like there are things happening outside of my control that are improving. to continue to deliver a consistent product and address when there's issues. You know, it's like if someone gives like a 2-star review, 6 years ago I would have just been crying in my room about it. Now I'm like, I addressed it, and like I put one, address it. Yeah, but I also then like see like, you know, maybe they were right. Maybe something, you know, wasn't good in the product or wasn't clean, or like, and let's fix that, because over time a consistent delivered product will just generate more traffic and regulars and so forth. So some of it I think is staying power, that you just have to be around long enough consistently to benefit from it.
Yeah. What about tech stack? Where's your tech stack today?
Do you mean like what software?
Yeah. Like what are like anything that like I saw you're using Square. Do you stand behind Square?
Yeah, I mean, like I won't like take a bullet for them if someone came in and gave me a better, you know, they just, you know, I think when I was in an airport flying home from London back in 2011, I saw an advertisement on a television screen at the airport for Square, and I was like, you can plug this thing into your phone. I had never even used a POS system prior to that. Yeah. And so to me, I didn't even know what I was going to need. So like to see that Square helped make that a more accessible thing for me, I didn't even know there was an alternative. Yeah. And so I've been with Square since day one. And so there's maybe some loyalty there. And they have, like you talked about Google and Facebook, they have just deepened their stack. So it's like we do payroll through them, we do marketing through them. And so it's sort of like it would be hard to imagine transitioning.
I've heard good things. I mean, Square is in the top 3. From the top, it's Toast, then Square, and I'm becoming a big fan of Spot On. And I kind of try to rally Spot On sometimes because I feel like Toast is getting way too big, and to the point where they're going to become another
Square.
Google, you know, it's just like we got to kind of spread out.
I mean, at any moment, Square could be like, "We're doubling your payroll fees." I'm like, I have nothing to do. Like, I can't.
And your whole business hinges on it.
Yeah. No, but I like Square. And we use Square. We use 7 Shifts.
Labor management.
Love 7 Shifts.
Why do you love 7 Shifts?
It just, I mean, again, not, you know, I used to do our schedule in an Excel spreadsheet, and I would like, you know, highlight all, copy, you know, Control C, Control V, new dates, and it's like tedious. And 7 Shifts just like manages it. And it also helps me manage expectations of my team. Like when you print out an Excel spreadsheet that's the schedule, people then think they have to go to you to change the schedule. Whereas now 7 Shifts is like, you can be like, hey, Emmett, can you pick up my shift? And it all happens and it updates in the app. So
all the communication happens. All you have to do is approve it.
Yeah, it has really allowed me to put some stronger guardrails on expectations, because I have often been the type of business owner that just says yes. Yeah. And in many ways, I like that about myself. But if you are so accommodating that you then can never take a weekend off because you are constantly on call, that's just, I know from experience that that's not sustainable. And so being able to set expectations with the team, being like, hey, when I employ you here, we expect you to show up at your shift. And if you can't, because we understand sometimes you can't, this is really how you address that. And here's all the other people you can address it with. Yeah.
And creating that pathway to make it be done right, so people aren't just defaulting to like, can I have the day off, but giving them a system where like it kind of removes.
Like, did you request it?
Yeah, like did you use the system? Correct the system, not the person.
I mean, right? I've had managers who are much stronger in this way than I am, and they've taught me. Even though I'm their boss, you know, they were sort of like, hey, like if you don't request time off for the holidays before X date, then you could be scheduled on it. Right. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, I would never.
Yeah. You haven't just streamlined the system by replacing it with technology. I think 7 Shifts also offers data. How has that helped you? Like giving you like sales records?
I haven't used that. You know, sometimes I do use the like labor tracking compared to sales and projections. I would say, first of all, being so young, like our Dover hasn't even been open a year. It is so...
it needs time to get those benefits.
Yeah, I'm like, it says we were going to do 1,000 in sales and we did 300 in sales. It's like, what? Like how, you know, it still is very variable, right? And like we're finding our sort of trends. Also, it's just like we are still small and young. That I'm still the GM basically, and so if I had like 10 stores and it was showing me like, well, Dan is consistently showing up 30 minutes late, like I would be able to sort of track that to sort of do it. Whereas like right now I can tell you who shows up on time, who gets in late or whatever. And also it's like sometimes the clock in doesn't work and I don't go back and fix it. And so there's a lot of what I would say heuristic approach to this company that other businesses might kind of solidify and have a system. And for me, I'm like, it's rule of thumb.
Any other technologies that you've been like really happy with your investment that you would recommend or get behind or promote?
Canva.
Yeah. Well, my next question was going to be technology around marketing. And I think that when I think of Canva, like those branding, marketing, design.
Well, and also Instagram. That's like our number one for in terms of like,
so what is your approach to marketing? Like what works for you?
Just keep doing it. I don't have a marketing plan. I sometimes have had a marketing plan and I am like so all over the place that it just makes me feel guilty. So if anything, I go off of inspiration and whims and I'm like, oh, you know what? Let's do a promo. Let's do this. Like, yeah, I think in the new year, I need to be more strategic.
Got it. So when you're using Canva, you're just using that in conjunction with Instagram to create appealing imagery. I mean, I'm looking at your website right now, and you have your Instagram tag like embedded right into your website. So you're clearly using design, and that's all within Canva.
Not all of it, but a lot of it.
Okay. What about your website? Did you build your website?
Well, originally a friend of mine built it back in 2015, but since then I have changed, updated, etc.
Got it. So, okay. Online ordering, I see that's through Square.
Yes.
Got it. Happening. I'm just looking for any cool things to point out. So before we kind of wrap it up, I mean, it's been about an hour and a half. I see you squirming. Do you need a break? Is your neck doing okay?
I'm okay.
Okay. What haven't we discussed? Anything you think you need to let people know in terms of what you wish you knew when you're getting started, in terms of where we're going as an industry and where we can choose to go together?
Well, probably like the strongest element about Teetotaler's brand is that we are a queer brand. And that that's what a lot of people would think about us or know about us. And that comes up in our voice. It comes up in our programming. And then that in some ways, not explicitly, translates into our clientele, that people tend to think of our space as a queer space.
Would you say people of the same feather flock together?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think our largest purchasing clientele are gay people, but we definitely have a larger share of gay people than maybe other cafes or businesses.
Sorry if I cut you short too.
No, so I just think that's definitely something about us that gets us a lot of attention, mostly positive, and is definitely leading. I would say, while I'm proud of that on many, many fronts and aspects and delight in it, probably the most important aspect of having a explicit values as a business is it has made hiring and retaining workers much easier.
How?
Because we often have people, LGBTQ people, apply, and many of them get hired, that say that being a space that is explicitly, not exclusive, but explicitly queer-friendly makes them feel more comfortable.
Right.
And they want to be part of that.
Right. So it's interesting how when we think of culture in business, they say be very intentional with the culture you're trying to embed within your business, the vision, the values, people you want to attract onto yourself when you're hiring people that share similar beliefs. So you can go, so you're a unit. I think that kind of spills over into political culture and socio-political issues too. So when you create a safe space where people who identify as a certain way can go and feel like they're with other people and feel like they can belong and feel like they're seen, you can piggyback on a greater socio-political culture that people identify with, and that why not draw those people in? Why not be a part of people that share the same? What's going through your head as I'm saying this?
Well, I do think there's a distinction between, in that sense, culture and values. To me, when I think about the work culture, there are certainly people that are like, hey, I'm submitting my resume or application to Teetotaler, and I'm like, okay, what are your qualifications? And they'll be like, I'm bisexual. And I'm okay, have you ever washed dishes before? Have you ever poured a latte? And so when I think of our culture, to me, our culture is about being giving people the benefit of the doubt, providing people with slack, collaboration, teamwork, leaving everything better than you found it, for the next person. Like, to me, that culture is what makes us a well-oiled machine. The values are what attracts people to want to come here.
Right.
So it's like when we have talked about the labor crisis in the restaurants, like so many people like can't find staff. I don't like saying this because it's not, I'm like worried the universe is going to punish me, but it's like we have never had a problem finding staff. I've never really experienced the like we have a role to fill and can't fill it. And I would really attribute that to we are such a loud business in terms of these are the things as a company we believe in and support and advocate for, sometimes deliberately. Like, I mean, I ran for public office, and much of what the company stands for is supportive of positions, political and social positions. And that means a lot to the people that would or do work here. Now, some of them might not have the qualifications, the experience, the culture that is yet ready to work here, but we have not struggled to attract folks.
So you listed your core values. It sounds like you have them written out someplace because it was very succinct, right? So those are your core values. What is your mission statement?
What is Teetotaler's mission statement?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it comes
purpose.
back. I think it comes back to that thing I said at the outset, that mantra of like, building connection.
Okay. For a specific target audience?
No, building connection. And to me, the values of being sober, the values of being queer friendly are a way that we connect people.
Got it. I mean, I think I love that you just distinguish between those two things 100%. And I think that there is when you create a safe space where people feel like they can be themselves, I think that's just when there's not a lot of other options out there for them, they're less likely to go someplace else, right?
Yeah, and I also just think that like we sometimes open businesses and we inherit what we have seen other people do without question, and it's like I know many places that like would not, would require that you don't have unnaturally colored hair or piercings or something, and I'm like, I don't care.
Right.
I don't care at all. And so to me, having a staff that like in so many ways like experimenting and exploring with their physical expression, I'm like, go at it, as long as nothing's gonna like
inhibit you from doing your job.
Exactly. I'm like, have purple hair. In fact, let's all get purple hair. Like, to me, that feels like an arbitrary kind of patriarchal way of being like, this workplace has to have like it's this grooming policy, and I'm just like, I agree and believe in like presenting a certain image and having an experience that we are creating for our customers, but that also has to be hip with like what people want to do. And it's like if people want to dye their hair and have pierced noses, like that's great. Like that's like I love that expression, or tattoos and so forth. And so I do think it allows us to shed some of the unconscious decisions other places might just make, because they're like, well, the last restaurant I worked at required that everyone has to be clean shaven and has to have natural colored hair and no visible tattoos, and you have to wear all black. And it's like,
I think collectively society is getting away from that.
Yeah.
I think there's a shift happening right now where we're all starting to realize, we are a melting pot of cultures. For the majority of this nation's existence, it's been predominantly a culture of white people and white culture, and and I think over time, as we become more and more diverse, like what is the split right now? I think 55% of Americans are of Caucasian descent, and it's getting to the point where it's almost 50-50.
It's like you're an anthropologist or sociologist. It sounds like you're a sociologist over here. I didn't know that.
I think so, and like we make up the majority, but we're getting to the point now where Caucasians are teetering at about 50%, and we're losing.
Not in New Hampshire.
Not in New Hampshire.
We got more work to do.
Yeah, well, I mean, you got to think, where's New Hampshire? It's like
second whitest state in the.
It's also closest to where white people came from.
Oh.
There's just an ocean dividing us.
Yes.
We all landed here.
Yes.
And we have privilege here. It's ancestral privilege over hundreds of years. Like,
yeah.
It only makes sense if there's more white people. That doesn't make white people bad or New Hampshire bad. It's just that's the way I think the cookie kind of crumbled for this part of the country.
Yeah.
And I think diversity is definitely going to make us better, and it's probably one of the reasons why we're a little far behind the rest of the country.
There's a lot of reasons why we're far behind.
Yeah, but I think by giving grace to those people and recognizing, like, listen, like there's work to be done.
Yeah.
But like, here's where you came from. This is why you're perspective is probably different because it's where you're looking out, and where you're looking out is different than anywhere other place in the country. We have to remember that. We have to give grace to that in order to change, I think. So going forward, what is your mission with your political efforts, with what you're how you're trying to use your business to make a better community? Like what is, like, if the mission statement is to change the world through inspiring and empowering the restaurant industry, how can we do that? How are you doing that?
Well, my number one is I want Teetotaller to be sustainable. And sustainable means it needs to be profitable enough. It needs to have enough top line revenue coming in to make sure that, you know, it's not a skeleton crew, that I'm not working every weekend for the rest of my life, that we're able to be inventive and responsive to new trends and just sort of be exciting and engaged. Like, so all that has to happen. And sustainability has to be first and foremost for my own, like, my needs have to come before my business's needs when I'm thinking about my life. And so I have to build something that doesn't actually take a little bit away every month from me. And it's taken me a long time to do that accounting, to like actually be honest about, like, is this a net positive or not? Am I sort of like bandwidth wise, am I in the red or am I in the black? So it has to be sustainable. And after that, and maybe a little bit in conjunction, it is clear to me that we offer something on this like community connection, value-based thing that a lot of communities crave. Sometimes subconsciously, but often consciously. And I'm like, wow, I have seen what we have contributed to a local community in Somersworth and in Concord, that it would be nice to bring that elsewhere. And I have scaled my company. I've opened 3 locations in my life, and it has not been easy. It's been quite hard, actually. And so I don't know what the best path is yet in terms of what scale could look like that doesn't then violate my first principle, which is being sustainable. But I would like to find out. Yeah.
When you look to the future, are you worried about people like independent restaurant owners, small unit from like 1 to 20 locations in that ballpark? Like, is it going to be easy for people to continue to operate like we have and like you have, or like, do you want to scale this? Like, what's your vision for this business? Do you want to scale it nationwide or just locally here? Is that going to be possible in the near future?
I'm definitely an ambitious person. I don't have a specific number or footprint in mind. I'm not like, I want to be the next Starbucks. I don't have that.
Yeah.
And I do know that I don't want any of those things if it means that my 30s and 40s are going to look like my 20s.
Right.
I have no regrets in many ways about what I did in my 20s to build this business, but I don't want to do it again.
Right.
That was the one and done. And so if I can find a model that works, and whether that means opening more locations, whether that means franchising, whether that means opening one a decade, but making them bigger, whether it means putting a hostel above every cafe. Like, there's a lot of different ways I think it could improve and increase its impact and continue to fulfill me. I don't know what it looks like. I do know that I want to continue.
Got it. In terms of your activism within the government, is there things that you think you have to change on a bigger scale, in terms of like how people vote to have a better sustainable business in the future?
Much of my platform and sort of political viewpoints are not about making any specific thing easier for what I went through. There's definitely a lot of things, I just think in New Hampshire, like, people always say we don't in New Hampshire have sales tax and we have such an advantage. Like, well, if you own a restaurant, you have a sales tax, and it's one of the highest meals taxes in the country. So, like, in some ways I'm like, I do have a unique informed perspective about it. And I do think the way that our state collects revenue and spends money is flawed, is deeply flawed, and is uniquely flawed in the country. But, that was one piece of all the things I think our state is doing wrong or could be doing better. I think at the end of the day, and this isn't specific to owning a restaurant or a business, is I don't think life should be this hard. Like, I don't think people should toil as much as they toil and work as much as they work for as little that they get. And I mean that as a business owner that feels like I've worked for a decade with very little, financial dividends. Certainly I've received a lot of social dividends. But in general, like we should not suffer as much. We should not be in as much pain as we are. And we should not be as lonely and as isolated we are. And I don't know politically what solution that is, except to say I don't necessarily trust that a lot of people that are currently elected care or know or have that perspective. And so I can't identify it's actually this one bill or this one law that's really a thorn on my side. It's just that we are all inheriting a mode of living and working that maybe our folks and their folks did that I actually don't think we should be aspiring to. It's I'm a big advocate of the 30-hour work week. I'm a big advocate of making things easier for people. I don't feel like that is a negative or shameful or lazy. I'm sick of glorifying toil.
Yeah. I've really enjoyed today's conversation. I got a couple final questions to ask you.
Lightning round.
I guess. What's one thing about your business, a value, a process, a system that has made you truly unstoppable?
Wait, ask that question again.
What is one thing about your business, a value, a process, a system that's uncommon, that's made you truly unstoppable?
We are a boldly queer business in New Hampshire.
The mission statement is to change the world through inspiring, empowering, and transforming the industry. So how have you personally transformed? How are you a better man today than the man you were when you started?
I am much more thoughtful.
If you got the news, we'd be leaving this world tomorrow. All the work, the memories of your work, your restaurants will be lost with your departure, with the exception of 3 pieces of wisdom that you could leave behind for the good of humanity and your legacy. What would those 3 pieces of wisdom be?
Don't go it alone.
1.
Have more fun.
2.
Get an accountant.
3. This has been a lot of fun, Emmett. Thank you so much, man. I found you because of the conversations I've had here locally and what you've done for people locally. When you think of somebody who is doing it right, who is an example of what the restaurant industry could and should be, who's fiscally responsible, who comes to mind when I'm saying these things?
Does that have to be one person?
No.
So one is a friend of mine who's local, Brett Winterstein. He owns Hi-Fi Burrito.
Okay.
Used to be Dos Amigos Eats or Dos Eats, something like that. It's Hi-Fi Burritos. The other one, I don't know her name. Her name might be Kathy, but the owner of the Foothills in Sandwich, New Hampshire, I feel like I met my match. I met my spiritual doppelganger.
Look out, Brent Winterstein and the ladies over at the Foothills in Sandwich, New Hampshire. I'm coming after you. I'd love to get you on the show. And how can we connect with you if we really enjoyed today's conversation? Maybe we have follow-up questions about what we discussed today, or maybe we want to come work for you. What's the best way to connect?
Me personally?
Yeah.
I'm at Teatotaller.
Okay.
On all the platforms. Or at Emmett Soldati on all the others.
Beautiful. This has been a lot of fun, Emmett. Thank you so much. I literally cannot do what I do without people like you being willing to get open, to get vulnerable, to share information, to share perspective, to share values. You make my work possible, and there is no questioning, my man. You are unstoppable.
Woo! Thank you. I love
you.
this.
Cheers.
Cheers.